Georgia 65, TCU 7, and a lot of the sentiments after that game across living rooms all across this great nation was, what did we just watch? It's supposed to be the national title game. It's supposed to be the two best teams in America going at it for all the marbles, and it was a 58-point victory by the Dogs. What's going on here? There's a lot of pieces to this, but let's start with the gameplay itself. And this isn't novel, but it was just pure dominance. Was in a group chat with some buddies, and one of the texts said for TCU, hey, it's getting late. It's getting late early in the first quarter, meaning TCU was very much so on the ropes in the very early going of that game. Now, Nick Breck and I got to be on the field at the beginning of this game, like pregame rather, not the game itself, but pregame, and a lot of the TCU players warming up in T-shirts that read, "Get off the ropes." And so TCU was on the ropes early, wasn't able to ever really get off the ropes, but that to me just tells me that their psyche was very much in a place where we're going to have to go 4 rounds with this team. I mean, we're going to have to go all 4 quarters with the Dogs. We know we have the heavyweight champ in front of us. We got to swing. And as bad as the final score was, watching that game, in the first 2 drives, there were a couple of plays that TCU left on the field. There was one specifically, I believe it was the first drive. Max Duggan breaks contain. He rolls out to his right. He's looking downfield, and you got a wide open, I believe it was Sevian Banks, was wide open downfield, overshoots him. And that was one of our talking points going into the game. When money is on the table against this Georgia team, you have to take all of it. Now, here's the thing. That wasn't a 58-point play. I don't know that would have made the difference, but maybe it makes the margin a little bit more respectable, because it was just dominance from Georgia. I mean, they came out swinging like we told you they would. Stetson Bennett was dealing, had just an absolute storybook kind of night. 18 for 25, 300 yards, 4 touchdowns passing, 2 rushing. Had himself a day at the office, passing out T-shirts and juice boxes at the end of the day, like just a clinic he put on for the TCU Horned Frogs. Like, he just had the game of his career. And people asked him after the game in the press conference, said, was that the best game you ever played? It's like, I don't know, but we're national champs, which was a very Stetson Bennett and very fitting Georgia answer for what they did that night. They also went right at TCU defensively. And a lot of it felt like this was the kind of game we expected Michigan to play, because we've talked about it all week, the 3-3-5 and, you know, the lighter box potentially for what TCU would play. They have less big bodies. It's more built to stop the speed element of an offense. And Georgia just lined up, went right at them. They didn't try and get cute. They weren't running Philly special on 4th and goal. They weren't throwing the screen out there when they had short yardage. They attacked the physicality of TCU. And again, that's what we thought Michigan might do. It wasn't, and maybe in hindsight, what they should have done. Hindsight's 20/20, but it was a lot of power scheme. And the reason why I want to hit on this is because all week long we said the big human beings of Georgia have a very good chance to be the difference maker in this game. And the way those big human beings get to have the most impact on the game is when you call plays for those big human beings. Now, what do I mean by that? In the power scheme, you are telling one of your linemen, typically the guard, to pull. So he's getting ahead of steam, running from one side of the line to the other, and your running back is following him. And I'm just saying, when you get a big man, get some momentum, come downhill at you, it's not a good story for the defense. And with how vicious those guys are on the offensive line for Georgia, it wears on a team. It wears on the team to a tune of 254 yards and 6 yards a carry. It was domination in every sense of the word. Offensively for TCU, a team that scored 40 points a game up to this point in the year, the team speed for Georgia, I think, was just the equalizer. Because so much of what Sonny Dykes does offensively is misdirection and getting the defense running sideline to sideline. It's hard to run sideline to sideline when you don't have the speed element. You don't have the speed favoring your offense. I mean, we saw Darius Davis get around the corner, and all we saw was Javon Bullard come right up behind him and strip that football out. That was speed TCU hadn't seen all year long. And I don't want to dunk on the Big 12. I'm not dunking on TCU. I think Georgia is in a class all its own defensively. What they brought to the table that night was just the way that it was going to shake out. Again, I don't think a whole lot less of TCU. We got the matchup we got because of the way the playoff happened. Not the way the playoff works, the way the playoff happened. TCU beat Michigan in 4 quarters of football. It was a game we got. But again, I don't think it would have mattered who showed up that day. It was Georgia's game. If you haven't yet subscribed, we got you. A lot of outlets, a lot of different programs starting to now transition out of college football season. Not us. We got you 12 months out of the year. College football is a 12-month-a-year sport. We get to cover it accordingly. So thank you for that. Also, follow me on Twitter and on Instagram at JDPakelJasave with every single thing that we're doing here. Want to incorporate you into this show as much as possible. All right, so thank you for that. So, like I said, this game plan rather for Georgia looked a lot like I think we had perceived Michigan would play TCU. Line it up, offensive line, go to work on that 3-3-5. Smash fest, like J.J. McCarthy said. That's what we expected to see. We didn't, and we got this matchup. There's a lot of people today saying, man, how did the committee put TCU in? Man, how did it happen this way? Why did we get this matchup? I'll just say this. Do not blame the committee. Do not blame the committee for calling TCU one of the best 4 teams. Because remember on Selection Sunday, the narrative across all circles was, if the committee doesn't put TCU in, that would be the biggest bunch of bias I'd ever seen. It's SEC bias if they don't put TCU in, right? Okay, well, TCU got in. And then 13.5-point favorite were the Dogs. 90% of the money, last I checked, 90% of the money was leaning towards TCU plus 13.5. That stat may not have held, but that was what it opened at. That was the way the money came in the first few days. I'm sure it evened out a little bit, but you hear what I'm saying. A lot of people were cashing that plus 13.5 ticket for TCU. So everybody going into this game felt pretty good about TCU, at least keeping it close. That was the perception, right? Here's who you can blame. You can blame Michigan for throwing 2 pick sixes and letting TCU win that game, or hurting themselves in that game, that is. Blame Ohio State. They had Georgia on the ropes. You could blame Ohio State for not finishing the deal. They were up on the champs, and they did not get it done. Shoot, had a field goal to win the deal. As the ball dropped in New York City, you had a field goal to send yourself to the national title game. I have a hard time believing Ohio State wouldn't have handled TCU based on what we saw. You can blame Clemson for not beating South Carolina. Remember, Clemson was a team that was very, very close to getting into the playoff if they had handled business the last week of the regular season. Blame Tennessee for not beating South Carolina. You hear what I'm saying here? The way this whole thing shook out, there was a ton of other programs that had a chance in the late part of the season, last couple weeks of the season. They could have found themselves in the dance, and they didn't. And for that reason, they allowed a team that did take care of business the duration of the year, the entire regular season in TCU, who then lost you allowed them the margin of error to then lose their conference championship game and get into the playoff. If you're upset about the matchup, blame the other teams. Don't blame TCU. Meritocracy is a beautiful thing. It's why we love college football. It's why a lot of us love the playoff standard right now and the playoff format right now. Do not blame TCU for the game that we got. Okay? Now, the question could be posed. Would somebody else have made the game more competitive? Sure. Alabama, on paper, they match up better. Ohio State, shoot, if you ran it back, who knows what happens that second game? Especially with a healthy Marvin Harrison Jr., who knows, man? Those matchups both could have been more appealing to the eye. It's not the way it works. The minute you start talking to me about TV product or about ratings or about anything that doesn't have to do with crowning the most deserving team in college football as national champion, you've lost my attention. I'm sorry, because this game isn't about ratings, contrary to popular belief. The game itself is about the game. I'm all here for ratings. I have a job because of the ratings. I have a job because of the demand for college football content and the demand for college football talking and consumption, all that. I mean, that, don't get it twisted, that pays the bills for me. But that's not what this thing is about. It's not what it's about when you line it up and blow the whistle, okay? So, at the end of the day, I'm not faulting TCU for getting to this stage. You can fault them for what they did on the stage. You can fault them for laying an egg and playing one of the worst games of the season for them. But I don't fault TCU for being in the dance. I'll leave it at that. But again, Georgia goes back-to-back. 65-7 was the final. And who knows? Could be up for a three-peat here very, very soon. But again, Georgia, national champs. Hey y'all, thanks so much for watching. Subscribe to the channel here to make sure you don't miss an episode of The Hard Count. Also be sure to check out other videos on the On3 YouTube channel.